And at this time, since Ryan has been able to make it here for the meeting and actually on time for when we figured, we'd appreciate if you would go ahead and present your report. Thank you.
All right. Does that work? There we go. Well, thanks for having me. I thought I was running on time, but you all are running early, so I thought I was going to have some time to hit the tables before and see how lucky I was feeling. No, I'm just joking. I don't make enough money to gamble. So thanks for having me. These are obviously very difficult times for everybody that is involved with the laboratory, but I think it's really important to look at how we can move forward from the issues that have occurred at WIP that are related to LANL. So I thought I would talk to you about some of the key issues I've identified that need to be addressed as we begin this process of moving forward. I had the pleasure of traveling last week to an intergovernmental conference where there's a lot of state representatives there from local government officials, state legislators, as well as members of my agency, with other site representatives as well as DOE officials. And I gave a speech at that conference where I talked a lot about these same concepts. So I thought it would be good to kind of update you on some of the things we're thinking about from the state's perspective that are necessary to really moving us forward. I think most importantly, though, just like I said in the beginning, these are difficult times, but from the state's perspective, we stand strongly behind Los Alamos National Laboratory. We believe in the mission of this facility and all of the great things that this facility has done in the past, and really want this facility to thrive moving forward. That being said, obviously, my role is to regulate this facility and ensure that it's following all of our laws and rules that I'm charged with implementing, and making sure that we don't have any future situations like we just experienced at WIP occur again. Now, the situation at WIP, which you all, I think, have already heard from JR about, we've talked a lot about what actually occurred at WIP, but I think it's really important not to lose sight of what could have occurred at WIP. We were extremely fortunate in that this release occurred at 11:15 on a Friday night when the mine had already been closed down due to the fire that occurred on February 5th. So the release occurred on February 14th. About 9 days before that, there was a vehicle, salt hauler truck, caught on fire, and that actually closed down the mine. And I mention that not to minimize what occurred, because we were certainly taking very seriously what did occur, but just to remind ourselves about how important it is to get this right. Because during a normal shift in the underground at the WIP, there's about 80 workers would be in the underground working at the WIP. And if this were to have occurred at 11:14 in the morning on February 4th, as opposed to 11:15 at night on February 14th, we'd be having a much, much different conversation today. And we probably would be in a much more precarious situation. So I think we, in some sense, were fortunate in the timing of this event, and also fortunate in where it occurred. The WIP facility, the structural integrity of the facility was not compromised during this incident. It got very, very hot, as the pictures that I think you've seen demonstrated, for a very brief period of time in the underground. But the actual structural integrity of the salt remained intact. And but for some dampers that did not close properly, really would have had no release into the environment. Now, I think, again, hindsight's 20/20. There's a lot of things that we're going to fix moving forward, and there's a lot of issues that this has brought to the forefront, and there's going to be additional issues that we're going to uncover as we move forward in the next couple weeks and months ahead. But I do think it's important to just think about what did not occur here, because this is a very important facility. This is a very risky enterprise, and if mistakes are made, corners are cut, things aren't done properly, then people their health and safety are at risk. And I keep sight of that as in everything I do, but this, I think, has really brought that to the forefront, that we must make sure we get this right as we move forward. And that's really the key. I think the key for me moving forward, I've got my first kind of bullet is restoring public confidence. And how do you restore public confidence? I think first and foremost by implementing meaningful corrective actions. And so that involves, analyzing the results of the various investigations that are occurring, and then implementing, not plans. I mean, you need a plan in order to implement a correction, but really, I'm not going to rest until we've actually done the work, the corrective actions that need to be implemented, and have completed those. And I think that's where we need to start. And in doing that, I think the first thing that we really need to do is understand exactly what caused the release. And unless there's been new information presented to you all, I know we've got a lot of different information, and we're getting closer to concluding what the exact cause of, what the root cause of this release was, but we still have not arrived at that point where I think the Department of Energy has been able to conclusively identify the root cause of the release. We know that we believe that it came from a container from Los Alamos, that we have visual evidence of a breached container that originated up at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And the Department of Energy, as well as Los Alamos National Laboratory, have assembled various teams to identify exactly what the root cause of this release was. But that's critical in terms of fashioning corrective actions, because until we know exactly what occurred, we really can't begin to move forward with reopening WIP and having some type of assurance that we're going to protect the public and really fix problems at generator sites like Los Alamos. And I wouldn't limit the corrective actions to Los Alamos. We need to understand exactly what occurred up at Los Alamos. But once we identify what occurred up at Los Alamos, and we've identified all of the corrective actions that need to be taken up at Los Alamos, we really need to also look at the rest of the site. Los Alamos is one of a number of generator sites, and I think we need to look complex-wide to make sure that the same problems that we've uncovered up at Los Alamos are not also occurring at other sites like Oak Ridge or Savannah River. And so I think that first and foremost, implementing meaningful corrective actions will require identifying the root cause of the release, and then identifying how we're going to fix the processes at the generator sites to ensure that something like this does not occur again. As we look forward, I think the state, certainly we want to also understand how some of the communication breakdowns occurred and were allowed to occur, and develop strategies to ensure that we don't have additional communication breakdowns again going forward. One of the things that's been troubling, I'm struggling whether troubling is the right word, but I think it is, certainly, it's not too strong, is to understand why advice from the difficult waste team down in Carlsbad regarding the proper remediation of these nitrate salt bearing containers was not followed up on the hill. LANL has a team, a difficult waste team in Carlsbad that I believe works for Los Alamos National Laboratory or LANS. I'm not sure who the difficult waste team works for, but it's LANL in Carlsbad on the difficult waste team. Had provided some direction as to how to handle this particular stream of waste that proved to be very difficult, and that communication obviously was not followed, or that advice was not followed. And we need to understand exactly why that advice was not followed. I mean, that's the reason why we have those subject matter experts, is to provide advice on difficult waste streams. And I think that's a key. There's been a lot of documented communication issues that have occurred, but that in particular is one that I'm extremely interested in having answered, and to figure out exactly how we can ensure that that these communication lapses don't occur again moving forward. When you look at the disposal of waste at the WIP facility, we've been able to dispose of a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And so the waste streams that we're now starting to move into for disposal at the WIP facility are increasingly difficult. So this nitrate salt-bearing waste stream was a difficult waste stream to deal with, certainly. But there are other waste streams that are going to be challenging. And as we move forward, we need to make sure that there's proper analyses from a scientific standpoint that are occurring, and that once those analyses occur, that the directions that are provided by those technical teams are implemented, and that there's clear accountability to ensure that that direction has in fact been implemented. So I think that's going to be another key issue, is really understanding why specific advice was not followed and how we can ensure that that won't occur again moving forward. I think we need to understand more about why the CCP, the Central Characterization Process, also failed to identify the problem and identify how we can fix some of the deficiencies in the CCP process. Finally, not from a Los Alamos perspective, but from a WIP perspective, we really have to ensure that the mine safety culture at the WIP is improved. One of the things that the Accident Investigation Board really talked about at the WIP site was the difference between the kind of the RAD culture, the waste handling, the hazardous waste and radiological waste handling culture, and the mine safety culture. And the WIP facility seemed to be doing a very good job when it comes to the RAD side, and they seem to be doing a very poor job when it comes to the promoting a really strong culture of safety from a mine, from operating standpoint. So those are some really key corrective actions, very broadly speaking, that I think we need to be focused on and ensure are addressed before we're going to put men and women back down into the WIP facility and potentially put them in a situation where they're now underground. And certainly we're very focused on moving as efficiently as possible, but at the same time we need to make sure that, like I said in the beginning, this is too important to people and to the public, to the men and women who have to work in the mine, to the people who live in the communities that both generate waste as well as store waste or dispose of waste, to rush. We need to get it right. So it's more important to make sure that as we move forward that we get this done correctly than it is to kind of rush to get something done in a couple months. So that's kind of the mindset I'm approaching this with. I want to be efficient, but I want to make sure we're giving this the appropriate attention that it deserves. Another major issue to moving forward is going to involve improving communications across, complex-wide between the Department of Energy and different states, as well as the state of New Mexico. We need to improve our communication. I think that that the Department of Energy is improving its communication with the state, but things aren't perfect, and there's obviously room for improvement. I think states across the complex need to improve communication with each other. This is not something that's really a big issue for you all, but it's something that's big for me in my position. In that WIP is approved to take waste from a variety of different sites around the complex, and there's a lot of jockeying for position to get waste to the WIP. There's also a lot of fighting for funding that occurs among and between states, and that when states fight against each other and work against each other on funding, a lot of times it's to the detriment of either states and their needs or of the WIP facility. And so I think there needs to be a better job for states in communicating with each other. I also think that, from trying to look kind of critically at my agency, at our role, and the role of other regulators, I think the regulators involved at the WIP facility need to really focus on improving communication with each other. there's over 20 different entities that have some type of regulatory or oversight role with the WIP facility, and you know, each entity, we're focused on the issues that are within our authority, and we're really focusing on just making sure we're doing our job. And I think that the one issue I've seen as a result of the WIP release that has kind of caused me to take pause is the fact that we don't really know what our counterparts are doing. The example I use at the WIP is the MSHA situation, the Mine Safety and Health Administration. They're by law required to do quarterly inspections of WIP, and in about 2008, I forget the exact date, I don't have it in front of me, but a number of years ago, the Mine Safety and Health Administration stopped doing their quarterly mine safety inspections at the WIP facility. And I think MSHA, what their reason was that they didn't believe WIP was a mine. And you know, WIP is unique. It's not a mine, but it's mine-like. And more importantly, by law, they're required to do these inspections. It was not until after the release occurred that we identified that MSHA hadn't done a mine safety inspection at the WIP in a number of years. And I think that example kind of spoke to me of kind of a silo effect that I believe was occurring at the WIP facility, where there's so many different people each with a kind of discrete piece of the puzzle here, that sometimes you start focusing on your little piece of the puzzle, and overall there's a lack of accountability in making sure that everyone is doing their job. And so I think that's something that I've been working with people down in Carlsbad, as well as talking to some of the other regulatory agencies on developing a strategy for breaking down that silo effect across that occurs across the different regulatory entities. So those are some of the communication improvements that I think that need to occur. I also think finally that funding for the WIP recovery is another kind of key piece of the puzzle. One thing I said down in New Orleans to the DOE officials, and I'm going to continue to say every time I'm asked, or even when I'm not asked, regarding the funding, is that I really have a problem with funding for the WIP recovery being taken out of the environmental cleanup budget at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I think from I'm not trying to put my counterparts from LANL, they have to follow orders. But at headquarters, certainly at the Department of Energy headquarters, I certainly think that their kind of idea is that the breached container came from Los Alamos, therefore Los Alamos should bear some of the responsibility for funding the WIP recovery. So kind of like you broke it, you buy it. And on one hand, I understand that logic, but I really disagree with it, and I don't think it's compelling. Because what you're doing, when you take money away from the Los Alamos cleanup budget, you're not punishing necessarily the laboratory. What you're really doing is punishing the state, because work that has been, the money that's been appropriated to do work for the state, which is what the cleanup work is doing, is it's restoring the state's land, it's restoring the environment for the public, is being diverted away from the state. And obviously there's secondary problems as well, because that means there's work that people, subcontractors, contractors, people, small businesses who would be otherwise doing that work if that money was not diverted, that they won't get to. But my primary issue is not necessarily, I'm cognizant of economic impacts of diverting budget, but my focus as the chief regulator for the environment in the state of New Mexico is on the impact to the environment and on the pace at which we're able to clean up all the different sites around Los Alamos that need to be cleaned up. So I've shared that with headquarters, and I'll continue to share that's something that's extremely important for me as we move forward, that money from Los Alamos should not be diverted to support the WIP recovery. I believe the WIP recovery will absolutely need to be fully funded. I support providing full funding for the WIP recovery, but I just don't think the state of New Mexico should be punished for mistakes that have been made by the Department of Energy or their contractors. I think that states also really need to, this is an area where when I mentioned about states communicating better with each other, states need to also work with each other to address priorities, especially when it comes to funding. A couple of years ago when we were really making a lot of outstanding progress that was made, and that I think we're not obviously not talking about because this WIP issue is so serious, but there was a lot of great cleanup work that has occurred over the past couple of years. And after the sequestration occurred and we were really strapped, the Los Alamos budget was forced to, they were under the continuing resolution, and then they had the sequestration come in the third or fourth quarter of the fiscal year. We were in a really tight spot to be able to make sure we continued the pace that we had established to maintain the cleanup. And when we were, I think Pete can speak to it better than I could, but they were really running out of money in a matter of weeks. And at that time, there was an initial attempt to move some money to Los Alamos so that they wouldn't have to stop the cleanup. And the state of Washington, their congressional delegation blocked that original attempt to move some money to Los Alamos. And it was, really bothered me because Washington gets over $2 billion for their environmental cleanup budget. And a very small amount of money was going to come to Los Alamos that would have a huge difference on our site. Whereas, $25, $30 million is not really going to make or break the Hanford cleanup. But it was going to have a huge impact on New Mexico and what we were doing up here in Los Alamos. And Washington blocked that, and their kind of attitude was if there's any money out there, we should get it. And we were fortunate in that through hard work from Governor Martinez, our congressional delegation, Senator Udall was also, his office was also very instrumental. We were able to get money then reprogrammed, and we had good leadership that was able to get it done eventually to get that money there. But it just always rubbed me the wrong way when another state who gets by orders of magnitude more money than New Mexico for cleanup, and more importantly, who has waste that they've publicly said they want to send down to the WIP facility, would block money coming into New Mexico that would have a real impact here. And I just thought that's always kind of struck me as something that I didn't think it was very diplomatic. I think that states need to do a better job communicating with each other. And before Washington would have kind of blocked money coming in from us, I would have liked to have been able to tell them exactly what impact that would have. And we were fortunate that like I said, Governor Martinez, our congressional delegation, especially Senator Udall, that we were able to get the money eventually. But that was troubling, especially when Washington is saying how much they want to send some of their waste down to New Mexico, that they would take actions that I think would frustrate our cleanup goals in New Mexico. So I think that states need to work together when it comes to funding. It's a zero-sum game to kind of constantly fight against each other. New Mexico, we obviously were in a very strong position when, because of the seniority of Senator Domenici and Senator Bingaman, and a lot of money was coming into the state previously, given the tenure that they've been in Congress so long, they were able to really address a lot of our needs. But Senator Bingaman and Senator Domenici were also very good at making sure other states' needs were met. And I think that we need to, I think our delegation is collaborative. I think Governor Martinez certainly wants to collaborate and work with other states, but they need to meet us halfway, and they need to really help understand what our needs are and be willing to work with us. So those are some of the key issues moving forward that I've identified. I find it closed by just talking about some of our investigation. I've received a lot of questions about some of the work that the Environment Department is doing in terms of investigating the issues and potential compliance actions. I think there are, from a regulatory perspective, issues that have been identified. Los Alamos has, to their credit, self-disclosed some of the issues they've uncovered, which I think certainly generates goodwill from the state's perspective. But we will, at the appropriate time, take the appropriate action. I'm not really in a position today to comment on when that will occur and what that will look like. But we take our role as the regulator very seriously, and certainly given some of the things that we've discovered in our investigation, which is ongoing, there are some deficiencies that we're obviously very concerned about, and we will take the appropriate regulatory action in the near future. But again, regulating, I think that, in my perspective as a regulator, it's really easy to find somebody, issue a press release, and for them to then cut you a check, and nothing ever happens. The hard part is actually figuring out what the fixes are and then implementing those actions, getting those actions on the ground, getting the processes changed, getting personnel retrained, getting permit provisions modified, fixed. That takes time, that takes real work, real collaboration, and that's what's going to be most important here, is not just issuing a fine or and a press release. That might make people happy politically, might get an article or two in the paper, but that doesn't really do anything to protect the public. The real way you fix these problems is by implementing meaningful corrective actions and then ensuring that those actions are revisited. Finally, I just finished by, I read an article in the Santa Fe New Mexican on Sunday, and one of the subheadings was that there's been lax state oversight, and I think that's just completely false. And I think that suggesting that is not only irresponsible, but it's just flat out wrong. And some of the things that were apparently cited were the fact that there were permit modifications that have occurred for the WIP permit. Well, there's been 124 permit modifications since the permit was issued in 1999. Let's not, really, let's, I'm a regulator. I work for Governor Martinez, very proud to work for Governor Martinez. I'm a Republican who's in charge of regulating the environment. It's a tough gig. The first reaction, though, playing this game of Republicans are bad for the environment, Democrats are good, is a joke. I think it might be good for an environmental group to go raise some money and to get people really angry, but it doesn't actually help fix any of the problems. And I think Democrats get upset when someone says Democrats are weak on national security, or Democrats don't care about protecting or supporting the military, and Republicans do. I also think that's garbage. Painting in these broad stripes or broad strokes about whether one party is better at one thing than another, all it does is divide people. The fact of the matter is New Mexico has Republicans, Democrats, independents, people of all different political persuasions. I represent the state of New Mexico. I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat or a Green Party. That my job isn't to pick a side. My job is to represent the state of New Mexico. So, perception that somehow there's lax oversight when there's a Republican administration in charge, I would challenge you to give me facts to support that. Under this Republican administration, we've fined polluters over $30 million. I've agreed to some of the largest settlements in the history of the state as the general counsel. Personally, I've done that. We take our job regulating WIP and Los Alamos very seriously. I think they could tell you how seriously we take it. I don't think so I think trying to suggest that a permit modification means we've been lax on oversight. Well, where were you when the other 100 permit modifications were approved during the Richardson administration? Were you saying they were lax on oversight then? Maybe you were, but it's one of those arguments that's a political argument. Maybe it scratches an itch to appeal to some fundraising, but it's not based on any type of reality. Permits are living documents. You issue a permit for a limited period of time, then you renew the permit. You change permits. The approved technology, the approved procedures in 1999 are going to be different than they are today. And that's because we gather more information, we understand more about the site, more about the waste we're dealing with, technological improvements are made, and we make appropriate modifications. So you're always going to, for every single permit we issue, we consider them living documents, and you make changes to reflect improvements in technology, improvements in information, and circumstances on the ground. The New Mexican also mentioned, which was very interesting, that the Environment Department didn't perform audits. And first of all, again, Environment Department, we don't do the audits. So the audits are performed by a contractor hired by the Department of Energy. More importantly, though, the audit would not have uncovered the problem that occurred here. So, and that was the author of the article actually wrote us an email and said he had a sentence that said that, and his editors cut it out in the final story that actually made it there. But the audit processes did occur. They are performed by DOE's contractor. I'm not saying that the audit process does not need to be improved. I'm not saying that there aren't areas in the permit that was issued in 1999 that we're not going to take a very close look at and consider making appropriate changes. I'm definitely not saying any of that. But I do take umbrage to the suggestion that somehow we've lowered standards, and that by lowering those standards, that has a correlation with what occurred here. I'm the toughest critic on myself. My secretary told me today that I'm getting gray hair, and she said Pete also didn't have any gray hair when he took the job, and he had gray hair by the end of his tenure, and I'm on my way to having, she told me, nice gray hair like Pete over there.
It's a true story.
But I'm my toughest critic. I've looked very closely, and I've really put a lot of pressure on my staff to look at what do we need to do. I mean, I'm certainly willing to step up and take ownership of weaknesses that we've identified. And I think we certainly think there are areas in the existing permit that we're going to look very closely at improving. But I've seen nothing, and there's no evidence to indicate that any of the decisions we've made, had we made a different decision, that we would have caught the waste issue that occurred that led to the container to be breached. And if I find evidence to the contrary, I'll be the first one to come out and own it. But there's nothing we've seen to suggest otherwise so far. But that's not saying that, again, we're going to continue to investigate. We're going to look closely at what the Department of Energy is doing. We're going to look closely at what we're doing. And we're going to make sure that when that man or woman goes to work down at that mine, or when that man or woman goes to work up at Los Alamos to treat this waste, that they can feel confident that they're going to be able to come home at night, and that they're not going to be exposed to an issue, and that the public is not going to be exposed to a container breach. That's our job. And like I said in the beginning, I have not lost sight of the fact that this occurred at 11:14 at night. If this occurred when the container was being stored outside up at Los Alamos, we'd be having a very different conversation today. If this occurred while there was a full shift going on, we'd be having a very different conversation today. I'm not saying we're lucky that it occurred, but I am saying that I understand, I'm fully aware of the stakes involved in this enterprise, take that very seriously, and I think everyone needs to take that very seriously, and we need to be guided that as we move forward.